This is Story Recapped. Today, I'm going to explain a sci-fi film called Doors. Spoilers ahead. Watch out and take care. One night, emergency services are suddenly swamped with calls about people hearing voices and exhibiting strange behavior. One caller explains that her husband started walking to the forest without saying a word to her. Others report seeing indescribable objects that keep them trapped in their room. The day after the strange calls, Mr. Johnson asks his students to turn off their phones and hand them over before starting an exam. He keeps the phones in a locked cabinet and tells the students they have an hour to finish the test. Jake is not interested in taking the test, so he throws a note to Ash and asks her to pass it on to Lizzie. However, Johnson sees Ash picking up the note, so he tells her to read it out loud. In the note, Jake asks Lizzie to watch Netflix at his house and make out. Johnson scolds Jake for disturbing the class and tells them to get back to work. A few minutes pass and a phone inside the cabinet starts vibrating. Johnson receives a message on his phone and sirens start blaring outside the school. Johnson makes a call and quietly tells the person on the other end to stay calm. Johnson puts Rory in charge of the class and goes outside to finish the call. Not long, their phones start vibrating again, so Jake gets alarmed and points out that something strange is going on. As Jake tries to open the cabinet, a woman announces through the PA system that the school is now under lockdown, but she doesn't disclose the reason. Jake worries that there is a mass shooting because he knows a student that collects firearms. When they turn on the radio, they hear news about an object hovering above the ground. The reporter notes that a man is walking towards it while the military asks him to stand down. When the students hear gunshots from the radio, they turn it off and decide to get their phones. Lizzie realizes there's no mass shooting, but they still don't know why the school is on lockdown. As the others figure out what to do, a voice calls out to Ash. Birds suddenly fly into the window and lights start flickering, so Jake urges his classmates to leave the school. In the hallway, the voice that seems to be emanating from the black wall urges Ash to come closer. As they observe the wall, Jake receives a message urging people to contact the authorities if they see a strange object and go to the hospital if they start hearing voices. Another message reports that 4,200 people have gone missing due to a strange phenomenon. The object continues talking to Ash, so she walks closer and unintentionally kicks a globe towards the wall. The students are alarmed when they see the ball disappear into the object. Ash surmises that the object is transporting anything that goes through it elsewhere and suggests that they enter it. Jake finds the idea ridiculous, so he and Rory try to find another way out of the school. Ash tries touching the object, so Lizzie tackles her. Lizzie senses that something is bothering Ash, so she tells Ash that she's there for her. Ash, who has a crush on Lizzie, can't hold herself back and kisses her. Jake sees them and gets jealous, so he shoves Ash away from Lizzie. Ash fights back after being persuaded by the voice. In the scuffle, Jake bumps into Rory and knocks off her glasses. As they continue to fight, one of them steps on Rory's glasses. Jake shoves Ash to the ground, but he immediately apologizes and he sees that she's hurt. When Jake tries to get close to her, Ash kicks him. Jake staggers back towards the wall and slams into Rory. The two students suddenly vanish after hitting the wall. The voice tells Ash that she's responsible, so she apologizes and says that she was only trying to defend herself. Lindsay wouldn't accept her excuse, so Ash decides to walk into the object. Lizzie calls out to the other students after Ash disappears, but no one responds. Soon, the wall expands and takes Lizzie inside it. After a few weeks, Martin Midnight, a radio program host about the paranormal, reports that the scientists have started referring to the strange objects as doors. Millions have already disappeared after going through it, but some were able to return. Midnight reveals that the government has launched the Knockers program, which allows volunteers to go into the doors to conduct an investigation. One of those volunteers is a young woman named Becky. While waiting for their mission, she stares at the sea and composes prose about the waves. She notes that she's an incubator for life, and she feels like a rock that can't move. She expresses her admiration for the waves' ability to flow freely and take any shape. She says she hates feeling like a prisoner of the ocean who can only wait to be consumed by the waves. Her boyfriend, Vince, another volunteer, tells her that he loves the verse and encourages her not to feel bad being a rock because it's strong. Soon, Becky, Vince, and another knocker named Patrick prepare to enter the door inside a secluded house in the woods. A woman from the headquarters tells them that they only have 12 minutes to leave. The lieutenant is puzzled because the previous team had 15 minutes, so the woman points out that the last group did not make it. If the knockers don't make it out within 12 minutes, there's a risk that they'll suffer from a permanent door psychosis. Apart from the knockers, no living or non-living things must be allowed to exit the door. The military will take lethal measures to ensure that only the knockers will pass through. The three knockers enter the house wearing spacesuits as a precaution. As they prepare to enter, Becky hears a voice saying, "I don't want to be a rock." The others, however, do not hear anything except music from the radio. When they get inside, Becky notices that they are no longer in the same house. Becky notices 3 doorways, so she suggests splitting up so that they could cover more area. Vince is against the idea because only Becky has a phaser. However, the other 2 already went on their way, so he has no choice but to go alone. Patrick ends up in a room where he finds a crying woman. As he approaches, the woman turns her attention to Patrick and asks him why he's looking at her strangely. Patrick surmises that she could be a door entity, but she seems to be real. When he asks for the woman's name, she chides him for not knowing it. She says her name is Rose, but Patrick doesn't believe her. Becky soon finds herself in a kitchen with utensils and baby bottles arranged in different directions. When she notices a cradle, a voice urges her to look inside. When she approaches it, she discovers that it's empty, but the voice tells her to embrace him. Vince enters a bedroom with a marble bust, a few trophies, and a clock set to 3 p.m. When he opens the closet, a voice tells him to come inside, so he enters the closet and finds another identical bedroom. He notes that there's now a beer bong, and the bust looks more somber. Before entering another room, he notes that the clock is now set to 6 p.m. He points out that the bust in the next room looks more irritated, and the clock is set at 9 p.m. Vince finds the next room creepier than the other. It's much darker, and the bust has square eyes. In Rose's room, Patrick finds an empty bottle of pills on a table. Rose suddenly suffers from seizures after the voice encourages Patrick to help her. Patrick tries his best to calm her down. When the seizure stops, Rose smiles at him and tells him that she misses him. Patrick tries to leave, but the voice instructs him to love her. In the kitchen, a figure enters and engages Becky in small talk. When the figure faces her, she discovers that it's the door. The figure keeps referring to her as honey, so she tells it to stop using that term. When Becky feels something moving in her womb, the figure asks her if the baby is alright. She points her weapon at the figure and tells it to stop. When the figure approaches her, she suddenly gets transported to another kitchen. When she opens her eyes, she finds Vince smiling in front of her. She points a toy gun at him, so Vince tells her to calm down and puts down the toy. Becky realizes that she's still in the door, but the doppelganger contends that the door was 3 years ago. The real Vince decides to head back when the headquarters announce that there are only 5 minutes remaining. On the way, he notices that there are people struggling under the bed sheets, so he runs away in fear. Patrick castigates Rose for taking some pills, but when he looks at her face, she has been replaced by the door. Rose petals suddenly start filling his helmet, so he tries to remove it, but he suffocates and dies. Becky becomes more agitated when her womb grows instantly. She points the toy gun at Vince's doppelganger again, so he tries to calm her down and points out that it's just a toy. However, Becky contends that it's not a toy and shoots him. Vince comes across another room, where he finds a picture of him with Becky. He notices his doppelganger in a jacket working in the corner of the room and asks him who he is, but the copy just asks him the same question. Not long, another copy of him wearing a sweatshirt arrives. As he documents the incident, the doppelganger in a jacket asserts that he's not the real Vince. He points out that he's wearing the spacesuit, so the copy in a sweatshirt agrees with him and says that they're probably entities. However, Vince's spacesuit suddenly disappears, and he finds himself wearing a Hawaiian shirt. Becky soon arrives with only 2 minutes remaining. The doppelganger in a jacket contends that he's the real Vince and tells Becky that she sees copies because of the door. Becky's suit disappears as well after the voice tells her to choose which one is the real Vince. The copy in a sweatshirt points out that their clothes could give her a hint. He points out that the other copy is wearing rain gear despite the sunny weather, so Becky shoots the doppelganger with the jacket. The doppelganger in a sweatshirt recalls that Becky is pregnant and reminds her that she didn't want to keep it. Vince says he remembers that day and notes that he got a nosebleed that got into her shirt. The doppelganger starts apologizing to Becky and admits that he's not the real Vince. Becky says that she doesn't want to be a rock anymore and shoots the real Vince. She asserts that it's her turn to become the Wave. Weeks after the launch of the Knockers program, Midnight reveals reports that the scheme only ended in disaster. He notes that satellites and birds are now falling from the sky, and the Earth is now going through strange weather changes. Furthermore, half of the world's population has now disappeared. Midnight asks his audience to tune in again the next day because he has a special guest who might provide them with answers. Somewhere in the woods, Jamal leaves his house and heads to a nearby site carrying some wires. Upon his arrival, he sets up a video camera and uncovers the audio equipment while chatting with the door. After making a few configurations on the audio device, he suddenly gets a response from the door. Soon, the door engages Jamal in a conversation and recites his social security number to prove that it knows something about him. When Jamal asks the door what it is, the object responds by saying he's a friend. The door notes that they came to the planet to watch sentient beings. Their goal is to archive the Earth and refresh all of its inhabitants. The next day, Jamal's friend Kathy arrives with her boyfriend, Leo. Before Jamal could tell them about his findings, Leo notes that they're lucky to remain alive as the doors keep killing more people. Jamal asserts that killing people is not the true aim of the doors, so Leo quips that Jamal may have lost his sanity. Kathy points out that Jamal is a brilliant scientist, and he was only fired from his job because of his controversial ideas. Before making his announcement, Jamal says that he called Kathy because she's still the most trusted companion in the scientific community, and he has no choice but to trust Leo because Kathy trusts him. When he finally announces that he has a door, Leo voices his skepticism due to the lack of knockers and the government agents to examine the project. Jamal, however, notes that he didn't report it. On their way to the site, Jamal reveals that he was able to communicate with the door. Leo doesn't believe him because he can't understand how Jamal would be more successful than the government that is equipped with more advanced technology. Upon their arrival, Jamal immediately sets up the equipment and talks to the door. When the door responds, Kathy is astonished to hear its voice. As Kathy and Jamal rejoice over their breakthrough, Leo pulls out his phone and walks away from the site. When Kathy asks for its name, the door utters something they cannot pronounce. Kathy asks for a nickname instead, so the door says they can call it Lamaj. Jamal informs Kathy that the doors are studying humans and collecting data, so Kathy surmises that Lamaj might be there to study friendship. Kathy remarks that the encounter could pave the way for humans to learn the secrets of the universe. Jamal asserts that they should take things slow. Kathy hesitates, but she eventually agrees and assures Jamal that they'll report the door when they're ready. When Kathy approaches the door, Leo tells her not to get closer because it could kill her. He worries that it could already be poisoning them with radiation, but Kathy argues that they can't pass up an opportunity because of an assumption. Soon, Ricky, a police officer, arrives and tells Kathy to step away from the object. Leo notes that Ricky is his friend and asks Kathy to comply, but she keeps pacing around because she's nervous. Leo tells Ricky to calm down, but Ricky points his firearm at Jamal and tells him to get down on his knees. While Ricky calls for backup, Jamal asks for help from Lamaj. Kathy hits Ricky with a piece of wood but fails to knock him out. As Ricky tries to gather his senses, he fires his gun and hits Leo. When Ricky aims his weapon at Jamal, Lamaj kills the officer. The door then tells Kathy and Jamal that it's time to refresh. Soon, satellites fall out of the sky and land on the forest. When Midnight starts his show, he immediately introduces Dr. Alan Price, a parallel worlds theorist. Midnight wastes no time and asks Price what the doors want from Earth. Price asserts that the doors are the cosmic consciousness of humans and the arbiter for existence. He says that the objects are everything and everyone all at once, and people can even consider them God. Price notes that there's nothing people can do to stop the doors because their process is perfect. He adds that the only thing people can do is wait to be refreshed. Price's signal suddenly becomes intermittent. When it returns, his room is a bit darker. Price tells Midnight that humans will shift into the next reality once the doors tether themselves into people's consciousness. The lights suddenly start flickering on both ends, but Midnight continues the interview. He asks Price what he knows about people who have returned, but Price argues that Midnight already knows the answer. Price stresses that everything that happened is a test, and results will help the doors decide the next reality for humans. Price urges Midnight to accept it and tells him not to be afraid. When Midnight asks him questions, Price utters the same question at the same time. Price taunts Midnight further by questioning his motives and pointing out that he's not in control. When the lights start to flicker again, Price tells him that the process has started. Price urges Midnight to embrace it, but he tries hard to resist. Midnight yells as he feels the changes in his body. Soon, Midnight stops resisting and heads upstairs while taking off his clothes. When Midnight's feed goes dark, Price welcomes him to his new reality.
Subscribe to watch more videos like this. Turn on notifications. And leave a like, it really helps the channel out. Thank you for watching.